Hey everybody, it's Chris over at Dixieland Farm, and today I'm going to show you my flight sim setup in depth. If you've never flown a plane or done any flight simming, and the Switchbox that I've built, you might just say, I don't know what any of that stuff is. So I'm going to show it a little bit more in depth so you can see how I can manipulate the plane in the simulator. Let's take a look real quick at the plane. So here's the plane, and here is my yoke that I've got here. So if I turn, you can see in the sim it turns and back and forth. I've got a flashlight, and sometimes this button is used for other things. So at night, I can turn on the flashlight real quick to see different things in the cockpit. And time advance is actually just that. It's changing the time outside. So sometimes it's nice to fly at sunset. So with this button, I can change what the time actually is. Over here are some controls. Two of them I don't use very often, and one of them I use all the time. So cowl flaps, what that is there is this lever that lets in air, and the cowl flaps let that air in for the engine. And when you're at cruise or descent, you don't need that extra air for cooling, so you can pull the cowl flaps to make the airplane more streamlined, and you gain a couple of knots. It's pretty negligible, but it's free speed, so that's why that's there. And then carb heat. Most of my airplanes are not carbureted, but that puts some hot engine air back into the carburetor. Makes the engine run a little rougher, but it does prevent icing. And icing can occur even when it's warm out. It's the sudden drop in temperature can cause actual ice to form in the carburetor. And then there are the flaps. You can see the flaps are slowly deploying right there. And I can bring back those flaps. Over here are basically all the lights of my airplane, so I can turn them on. And these control levers in the plane, if we take a look, is for throttle, how fast or slow I'm going, the prop speed, how the angle of the prop into the air, and that also controls how fast it's turning, and then the mixture of how much gas to air ratio there is. So I can manipulate each one, and since I fly a lot of dual engine aircraft, I can have just single controls here. A couple of things up front here is also a calculator to help figure out descent rates when I've got the formula for that descent rate, and here are a couple of checklists for two of the planes that I fly. Most of the time I don't use the checklist, or if I do, there's actually one built into the simulator itself as a plugin. Now for my control box here that I built, they are in little different sections here that I use. The top is for Autopilot, so that's Autopilot, Flight Director, which kind of tells you where you're going and where you need to turn. It's like a guidance system. And the yaw dampener that controls the sway of the back of the plane, and some airplanes have that. And then I've got a shift button. The shift button allows me to reuse buttons, but for a different command. So if I hold down shift and hit this button, that puts it into heading mode, the Autopilot, or into nav mode, or into approach mode. So I don't have to have another 3 buttons. I just use the shift button. The second row here is for communications. So I'm listening to COM 1. I could listen to COM 2. I could listen to nav 1, nav 2. Just by flipping the switch, I can listen to. And this also controls what I'm going to transmit on. So I'm going to be transmitting on COM 1, or now I'm transmitting on COM 2. This bottom row is one of the most important rows, the row that I use the most, and it's actually set up that way. So that way I can just kind of rest my hand here. So I can control with the knob the COM 1 radio. If I hold down shift, the COM 2 radio, the nav 1 radio, the nav 2 radio, so I can change the frequencies. This one controls quite a bit. It controls my heading. If we look here on the HSI, the horizontal situation indicator, if I put it in heading, you can see I can turn the knob and it moves. But you notice it also moves pretty slow. If I hold down shift and turn the knob, now all of a sudden it turns quite a bit quicker. Barometer changes the barometer, which helps with setting the altitude. So that's the barometer of the air, and that is how you can determine your altitude. so I can set the barometer. And same thing, if I hold down shift, I can flip through it much quicker. If I hold down shift and push the button, now I'm in OBS mode. And what OBS mode is I can change a bearing that I'm trying to navigate to. And same thing, if I hold down shift, I can move it much quicker. The last button is for Autopilot. I can control what altitude my autopilot is going to be set at, or what vertical speed, how fast or slow I'm going to ascend or descend using the knob. If I hold down shift, I can put it into GPS mode, and what that does is control the knob on the GPS. Up top here is pretty simple. My fuel pumps for engine 1 or engine 2. The magnetos, which are like the spark plug. You have 2 different spark plugs, so I can turn on one or turn on both. You fly with both, but when you're doing checks, you check each one. And then the starter button. This row controls the battery, the alternator, the avionics. So by turning all 3 of those on, I'm basically turning on the aircraft. So battery, alternator, avionics. Pitot heat, there is a tube outside the airplane that you can turn a heater on so that way it doesn't get clogged with ice. So that's helpful when you're flying through clouds. And prop sync, what that button does is on a dual engine aircraft, the engines can go kind of out of sync with each other, and there's a prop sync button that'll make sure that they click into place, so you don't have to manually try to speed one up or slow one down to get them in sync. You just hit the prop sync button. And down here we've got views, so I can switch to different views in the cockpit that I need. And same thing, if I hold down shift, I can go to different views I may have set up. I can also do a combination of buttons here. So if I hit 1 and 2 together, that's the external view here. And if I hit 3 and 4, that does a different type of view. And I hit all 4 of them, that gives me a far away kind of view. Moving down to the last row here is for my GPS. So I can hold down this shift button and put it into a different mode here on the GPS. One of the other switches is the park and brake. These are gear lights telling me that the gear is down and locked at the position. If I don't have all 3 green, that means my gear is not down correctly. And then here's my gear switch, so I can raise or lower my gear. This button over here, the transponder, I can, by holding down all 3 of these buttons, put it into transponder mode. Then I can set the transponder. If I hold down shift and the outer key, that'll put the mode in so I can turn on the transponder, and you see the transponder light is now blinking, telling me that it's transmitting, and it blinks in accordance to a code. If we were going to start this airplane, what I would do is I would turn on the fuel pumps, the magnetos. I would set the mixture, props, and just a little bit of throttle. Let the fuel go into the line of the engines. I would then kill the mixture. Then I would hit the starter. And once it catches, that's when I would give it gas. The reason why we don't do it all at once is because if the engine caught on fire, we would just be dumping gas onto it. So we kind of do it in one motion. So here we go. That one engine started. We got the engine going. The last controls I hear are foot pedals. So what they do is they control the rudder, the back of the airplane, and you can see as I move my feet, I'm moving the rudder. It also changes the steering of the airplane. I also have foot brakes. If I push forward, those are the brakes of the airplane, so I can manipulate that as well as I fly. Well, that's it. That's the entire tour of my aircraft system. So you can see I basically can manipulate quite a bit without actually having to use the mouse or the keyboard. There are a few things I can't manipulate, like the de-icing systems. Not all my planes have de-icing systems anyway, and to set up the knobs for each plane would be kind of a lot of labor. Plus, I wouldn't have had that much room on my box to put that in. And each plane's different, so it just wasn't worth it. Some things are just not worth the extra effort. It's not a goal to have a knob and switch do everything. It's a goal to have a knob and switch do most things that I need quickly and that help my experience without having to hunt around for them. So that is my flight sim setup. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Take care.